Thank you, Dawn, and good morning to everyone in the live audience and on the webcast, those attending remotely. I'm Brian Carlson from West Coast Informatics. We're a long-term technology partner of SNOMED International and proud to be sponsors of this opening plenary and exhibitors and presenters at the 2022 Expo. Our focus as a company is to increase the availability and use of standard terminologies across all clinical and research contexts by making them as easy as possible to use. We believe every stakeholder in every healthcare system in the world should be able to find and use the terminologies they need exactly where and when they need them and in the form that they need them. And we hope to continue working with SNOMED International and others to make that a reality. Please stop by our booth across the street and attend our session at 10:30 to learn more about how we're trying to do this. So this morning, the keynote session explores the vision of global interoperability through the lens of the G7 Global Digital Health Partnership and the International Patient Summary. International groups, organizations, and tools that are working to advance a semantic agenda. To share this developing story, we're joined by a distinguished panel of experts working on a number of these initiatives, both internationally and at home. First, Karen Johnson, NHS England, joins us as the past program lead for the successful G7 International Patient Summary, which was tasked to work out how an IPS should be developed and used across G7 countries. Next, we have Herko Coomans, Digital Health Policy Coordinator, who builds international alliances and partnerships at the Netherlands Ministry of Health, Welfare and Sport, is an active and driving member participant of the Global Digital Health Partnership. And third, we have Alastair Kenworthy, the Chief Standards Advisor for Data and Digital at Te Whatu Ora Health New Zealand, and presently leads New Zealand's involvement in the interoperability workstream of the Global Digital Health Partnership. To kick off today's session, I would like to welcome Karen to the podium.
Thank you. The high-tech clicker that I've got to get my head around. Thank you very much for inviting me. I've been involved with working with the G7 and the International Patient Summary over the last year and a bit. Unlike many presentations, I've got a confession. I'm going to put a lot of information up on the screen. I don't expect you to read it all, but if you want to go and find out more details, then please head over to the UK government website where we've got the reports, and a lot of the slides and the content will be available there. If you want to contact me, for those of you that are lucky enough to be here in Portugal, if you see me, you want to talk more, just grab me and I'll be happy to sit down and talk through IPS with you. Alternatively, please feel free to send us an email and we can continue with dialogue. So I'm going to say this much of the way of a story and why we've done things rather than what we specifically did. So the starting point was use cases, why we wanted an IPS, what it could do for us. And the first of those use cases was really you guys in the audience today. You've travelled away, many of you from your home countries. So what information, what health information, should you need it, would be available if you needed to receive treatment in Portugal. So the first of those was a traveller. The second, because we happened to be doing this in the time of a pandemic, was working out what an IPS could do and how it could support vaccination status. So obviously COVID was high on the agenda. It was something that our health service was very interested in, but we wanted it to be more than that. We wanted to be able to demonstrate for other conditions like yellow fever and what that happens and how that can be verified or authenticated if you're traveling between a yellow fever zone and other countries, whether or not those countries are using IPS themselves. So what could IPS do in those situations? Unfortunately, we are a world of natural disasters. Not all the time, but we do seem to get them at an increasing level. So the example we used here was the tsunami in Japan. What happens and how could IPS support a local infrastructure if it had been decimated by a natural disaster or war? How could you as an individual under those circumstances receive the treatment and care that you needed? And what could we do to support the displaced communities? So the example used Syria, but Ukraine is in most people's minds today. So how can we endeavour to ensure that patients are provided, or people that are in need of care are provided with the appropriate care wherever they are? So those were the 4 main case studies that we worked to. If you go into the reports, there are many others that we looked at. So what happened? How did we get to do this piece of work? Well, in 2021, the UK had the presidency of the G7, and there was a ministers' meeting in Oxford, and then the final event, the summit in Cornwall. Our health minister was very keen that we started to look at patient information and how it could be shared and how it could be used and consumed electronically across the board. So using IPS. The summit came up with a set of commitments and ambitions, and principally the one for us was how the International Patient Summary could deliver patient access to health data and use the common and agreed open standards in the international forum. Okay. So the challenge for us was we'd got 6 months. This presidency ended at the end of December, and we started this in June. We had 7 countries that we needed to collaborate with and come to some consensus. And we also worked with the European Union, who sit as a non-voting member of the G7. So quite a lot to do in a very short space of time. But that's all, you know, the nitty-gritty. We wanted to make it real. So we developed a couple of prototypes. The first one around data sharing was looking at what we'd got in our own health infrastructure in England. And for those of you who don't know, the NHS in the UK is divided into 4 sections. So there's an NHS in England, a different structure within Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. So this is focused very much on where I work within England. So we looked at our infrastructure and worked out whether we could do it, whether we could create an IPS, what information did we have available, how would we got sharing going and so on. But we also wanted to show something that patients could consume and clinicians in other countries. So we developed the interaction one. It's just a wireframe, and all of those are available to you at the GitHub address there at the end. If you wanted demonstrations, then, you know, get in touch. And we produced 3 reports. So we produced the roadmap for the International Patient Summary. We looked at patients having access to records. Not all G7 countries have the same legislation or patients' rights to information. And we also worked on open standards and interoperability. So those are freely available. Please download them if you are interested. So looking at the foundation stones, it became apparent very early on that we needed to take the path of least resistance through everyone's health economies and infrastructures. So we had countries with different starting points using different systems. In the UK, we have a lot of information held within primary care. In the States, it's more in hospitals and secondary care. We've got different health economies, so different structures, different ways of organising ourselves. We'd also got different ambitions as countries. Information governance was an incredibly important one, and I'll come on to that later. what data we used and how that information had been recorded, and the different legislatures as well. So all of those were complicating factors in just rolling out an IPS. So as I've said before, or just mentioned, one solution would not fit all. So we needed something that was flexible enough that could be implemented within each of the individual countries, but also cohesive enough so that should we come to the point where we wanted to actually share information between systems to systems, we were able to do that. So relying heavily on the open standards and interoperability there. And to do that, we focused on patient-controlled access to the information, or patient-mediated access as it's now becoming commonly known as. So I as a patient have access to my information. It's my information and I can choose with whom I want it to share it with. So whether that be a clinician within the UK, whether it be in the Netherlands or New Zealand or anywhere else, I can take my information with me and I can share it. So what we found that we needed to do is start off small and then build up and include more and more information. So we would have a minimum data set. I'll show you in a moment what that looks like. And then based on user needs and requirements, we would get more and more complex information, and that could be shared through the IPS structure. So that takes care of data. I have a feeling that some of my slide is missing there. Right. The second is the technology. So in order to have confidence in the information that's being shared, we need to be able to share it to a certain standard. So we would start off with a minimum viable product, and then we would work over time to be able to perhaps share information cross borders, whether that be national borders or whether it be international borders. So literally taking information or copying information from one clinical system, say in the UK, to another clinical system in the Netherlands, if that was appropriate. And again, the patient would have control over that and whom that got shared with. At the moment, it's more like the grey and the blue boxes. So if you're going for treatment or need care abroad, it's what we remember, or if we're lucky, what we've written down. Lots of people will take copies of their medication and the last scripts. If they're lucky, a clinician would be able to look at a structured set of notes. So for example, in England, we have the NHS app, and I read on the BBC News last night that we've now had 30 million downloads and uses of the people using the NHS app. So we're now over half of our population, but at least that gives some structure. But it doesn't give naturally a confidence behind that data. So having an IPS would give confidence both to patients and clinicians about the type of information available, whether it was complete, whether there were elements that were missing, whether there were elements that the UK as a country had decided not to share, for instance, or was unable to share. So it starts to give us some certainty and surety around the information that we can share. The roadmap looks a bit like this. So we identified that there would need to be some preparation done within each of the countries. We then looked at what ought to be in the minimum data set. And I say this is specifically towards the G7 rollout, not necessarily the IPS itself and the ISO standards, but it was a practical way of us being able to roll this out. So the information that was required for that, and then what the additional data is and how those could be brought online. We looked at what should be included in the minimum viable products, and then into enhanced functionality, and then what we would need to do if we were going to move into system-to-system transfer of data. But we didn't make all of this up. We heavily based it, and we've used as the foundation stones the ISO standards, both for the International Patient Summary, but also how we can share and the standards around good sharing of information in interactive systems. We use FHIR and recommend that we use the latest one of FHIR 4 and keep that up to date as well. But we also had the opportunity to learn from communities that had already been looking in some way or another around issues related to the IPS. So the GDHP group, SNOMED, My Health in the European Union, and Trillium. Links to those are all in the reports as well. So the GDHP was really important to us. It enabled the 5 of the G7 countries are members of the GDHP, but it also enabled us to test and try out our ideas with a wider community rather than just the G7. We sit as part of the interoperability work stream. And to give you an example, this is what has been happening within GDHP in relation to IPS. So you can see there's test servers, the Canadians brought their experience and how they were approaching it. We brought the G7 reports and so on. And Herko will mention the next of those sessions, which is coming up next week, I think. We also work very closely with Susie and looking at how SNOMED could support the data exchange. IPS itself, the ISO IPS, doesn't specify which coding language or coding or terminology structure it needs to be used. It talks about data and what data needs to be transferred. So working with Susie, we've been able to look at the international patient summary set and how that will work. And lastly, before I hand over to Alastair, I just want to plug a couple of sessions. So Susie's got one about the IPS section, and Rob is also doing one about the practicalities of us incorporating such things as SNOMED into the IPS specifications. Okay. So that's from me. Until questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, and thanks everybody for the thrill of presenting to you today. I looked at this time slot on the program that was sort of published in advance, and it was sort of speakers to be advised, and I never thought it would be me, but thank you. My children have advised me, don't be cringe and don't be pick me. So I don't know whether those words resonate with you, but I'm probably going to be both of those things. So apologies in advance. So we're zipping ahead with the IPS in New Zealand as part of our interoperability program. We're not zipping ahead of anybody in particular. We're just accelerating our own program around interoperability using the IPS as a vehicle. And if you're wondering about Te Whatu Ora, and Brian, thank you for your perfect pronunciation, well done. It means the weaving of wellness. So this is our new National Health Service in New Zealand. So we're going all out for an integrated system. So as part of my exploration of the very, very beautiful city of Lisbon, I went for a walk down to the Champalimo Centre for the Unknown as a walk around the waterfront. I don't know whether you've been down there. If you haven't already, please go down there. And I was sort of struck by the architecture, and I saw a parallel with what we're doing. So we are looking at the standards that are sort of best fit to shape our health systems and shape the care that they provide to our citizens. And it's sort of it's a fine art. So it struck me that way. But more importantly than that, it gave me some inspiration for my talk today, in that right in the pavement there, and it wasn't cobblestones, I think it was something else, were these slogans. So let's have a look at them. A huge growth in biomedical data, more efficient computer coding, eradicating old ways of working, closing the gap between rich and poor, and living longer, healthier lives. This is what we're all about. And I think what this did for me, it was awe-inspiring really, because it said while we have this existential crisis, with SNOMED and where does it sit with ICD 11 and how do we go forward, if we think about humankind and we think about our future and we think about a data-driven future, it's encapsulated in these few words, and we are a part of that, and I'm very proud to be a central part of that. So switching attention to the South Pacific, so we have two small islands in the South Pacific making up Aotearoa, New Zealand. Sunny Islands, I should mention. We are changing our health system. We've had a devolved health system, and we're swinging back to a more fully integrated health system, which seeks to address some of the systemic problems that we've had for decades. And one of them is the existence of health inequities in our system that many of you will be familiar to many of you in your own systems. And these health inequities derive from just the way that New Zealand, Aotearoa, New Zealand was populated in successive waves of migration. So first, 800 years ago, we had voyages from the South Pacific, brave voyages, sailing by the Southern Cross in the sky, finding our shores and settling there. Several hundred years later, Europeans arrived and struck a treaty with Maori, and that treaty promised a degree of self-determination for Maori, but also fair treatment. However, in the 21st century, unfortunately, we see that Maori have worse health outcomes and a 7-year less life expectancy. So one of the reasons for reforming our health system and creating a single national health service and a more fully integrated health service is to redress that inequity and that wrong. So what's good about interoperability in New Zealand right now? And I'm just going to take a wander down this end. So I think I'm mic'd up for that. So this is the good on this side. You guys can think yourselves lucky you're in the good. So good in New Zealand around interoperability is we have a growing footprint of SNOMED adoption. We have a growing footprint of standards adoption. We have a SNOMED New Zealand edition. We have patient-friendly terms in English, but also Te Reo Māori. We have a consumer data right. So the right for a citizen to own their own data. And we have world-class software in some of our health pathways things. We have a world-leading cancer data program with structured pathology reporting, and we feel we're doing quite well in a number of areas. However, there are grey clouds, and I'm sorry, this is you. So the grey clouds are that we have a whole system of health providers and their industry partners who we need to shift, and some of them are resistant to that shift. Some of them would rather that we belonged to an organisation called Nowhere International than SNOMED International. And they cling to local coding systems that are long dead and should be in the ground. We also have the situation where people are seeking to monetize consumers' health data and throw up paywalls where they should just be putting up public good APIs. So that's the bad, but it's in the minority and it's shrinking. And everybody in this room, probably in their own systems, has strategies for dealing with that. So somewhere in the middle, we have this opportunity space, and I'm kind of calling out to my Pacific colleagues here, and we have had discussions at this meeting to look at what we might pursue together. And we see the Europeans so well organized, and we're a little envious of that. And we think that around the Pacific, Asia Pacific, or Indo-Pacific, as we sometimes call it now, that we can get organized around SNOMED and around interoperability. So one of the things we're thinking about is a joint medicines terminology. We all have medicines terminologies, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand. We can share some of what we've learned with Australia. I know they're grateful for that advice, and produce a common medicines terminology. And beyond that, we're thinking about a Pacific health passport. And there is still a lot of migration between New Zealand and other Pacific Island nations, and a Pacific health passport is an idea that we can look at. So to pursue all these things, and not to go on too long, we've published an interoperability roadmap in New Zealand. It has 4 themes. One of these is around identifying the actors in the health system, and we're very lucky to have a national health identifier in New Zealand for some time, about 30 years. COVID, the big shift that COVID produced for us was that people were able to book COVID vaccinations online, upload test results, and those sorts of things. And that was thrown up in a big hurry, and we put aside all our concerns about whether it was safe to attach a national identifier to somebody's mobile number. And now that's an accepted practice in New Zealand, and we have about 80% of our adult population with access to these systems. The second theme is around surfacing the data, and I guess the principal standard here is HL7 Fire, which has been a fantastic place to play, if you like, and to drive things forward. We want to basically create new routes into legacy systems to surface the data that's previously been locked up. The next theme is really the concern of this group, which is around establishing the same languages, speaking the same languages, and using the same information models, the same terminologies. And we want to be able to give health providers and their industry partners a 5-star health rating in terms of their ability to share information. Our national program in New Zealand to pursue these things is called HERA. It means of consequence. We hope it will be. The government's investing in it in a way that we haven't seen for some time. So we're pursuing that wholeheartedly. So getting back to the zipping idea, FHIR and SNOMED are our principal standards for interoperability. The IPS has come along and has joined those two things together. There are multiple paths through FHIR. It's a broad landscape. SNOMED is too, but the IPS is providing a real focal point around that. We've produced a specification called the New Zealand IPS, or New Zealand International Patient Summary. We're hoping it can be a long-lasting standard that will support multiple use cases for our health providers and their industry partners and make a real shift in how we do interoperability. The concepts are not all new, but they have attracted such attention, and I'm indebted to the UK and other countries, G7 and the Global Digital Health Partnership, for bringing a real prominence to something. Standards are often, down a bit in things, but for ministers of government to be aware of a standard and to be promoting it is quite something. So in New Zealand, we've published a specification which is really our adaptation of the International Patient Summary. It's really to draw attention to the fact that we have some other standards we want to push there too, for instance, SNOMED. We have some tools backing that. We have a fantastic tool suite now, a FHIR registry. We have terminology services. And our relationship with the Global Digital Health Partnership really can't be understated, because this is another meeting of the minds, such as SNOMED International is, which brings together governments and says, we're going to move in this direction. We're going to move together, and we have these priorities. And in that way, we draw on each other's strengths and make a real change in our own health systems. So it's obrigado from me, and I will hand over to my good friend, Herko.
Whoa, tough acts to follow. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for having me here. I'm Herko Coomans. I work for the Dutch Ministry of Health, Welfare and Sports, where I do the international collaborations on digital health that we have. And well, we've already heard a lot about why the IPS is important and how it works. So I'm not going to go too deep into that. And I wanted to share with you a different perspective. The Netherlands is only a small country. We're 17 million people. We're in Europe and in a place in Europe where there's a lot of people coming in and coming out. So it's not, we're not an island in that sense. And I wanted to share with you and start with the story of one of my heroes. And that is this man. This man is called Niels Schuddeboom. It's a Dutch name, and we will practice later Schuddeboom together. But he is, or was, I should say, a patient advocate. And with his work, he became the ministry's first CEO, the Chief Experience Officer. And as such, he was an integral member of our ministry's management board. And he got access to all those emerging policies and the documents and everything. And he was given the full right to give the patient view at the ministry top level. And he is famous in the Netherlands for his work in that he says, as a patient, you have to dance with the system. You have to, not if you want the change to be effective, you cannot just fight the system, but you have to dance with it, and he danced with it from within. Sadly, he died of cancer in early 2017, and in November 2016, when he had this diagnosis that he wasn't going to live that much longer, he gave what he said himself said was his last lecture. He gathered all his friends and all the people he worked with together, and what he did then, he said, I'm going to pass the torch. So he got a group of people together and he said, these are my torch bearers. And then they are going to dance with the system. And every year since then, the Ministry of Health has awarded the Shaking Tree Award. The name Schuddeboom is literally a translation, is shaking tree. So that's what he's done. He shook the tree. And every year there are patient advocates who dance with the system. They are nominated, and one of them receives this award still every year in his honor. And I say this, and I start with this because I think it's important to remember why are we doing this, and how, and we tend to, at these conferences, well, we tend to dive into the technicalities and to the legislative and to policy, and but it's very difficult to keep in mind why are we actually doing this, even though it resonates with everyone and it's really close to our homes. So Niels said that I cannot be an effective human with all his conditions if I do not have any control over my data. It's one of his key influences that he can do to manage his conditions and his daily life and his contribution to dancing with the health system. So in the Netherlands, like in many other countries, we also have a right to your own, a copy of your own health data. But then we thought, what if, as a patient or as a citizen or whatever role you're in, what if you get all your data? Then what? In health systems, it's protected, it's governed, it's managed, it's quality assured. But as a citizen, what are the tools that you have in order to do that? So the Netherlands has a completely decentralized healthcare system with no government healthcare delivery. So government does not really have a role in the patient-doctor relationship. So a central portal with services wasn't an option for us. So what we've done is we created a trust framework for service providers for personal health data. So if patients have their own data, how can they store this and how can they enrich it, add their own data, and then share it with others again. So these are a set of rules and a governance model for service providers to be certified to. And now there's about, I think, 30 different service providers, with only from those 17.5 million citizens that we now have 25,000 live users, which is by design. But I'll get back to that. So Niels kickstarted a big, broad movement, not just in government, but if you want to dance with the system, you need to dance with the entire ecosystem. So one of his key points was you have to bring the whole system in the room in order to do this. And what we see now is that there's this maturity curve that we're all in, where on the one hand, we see this huge influx of innovation and acceleration from the market, driven by the huge amount of investments that are coming into this space, with the increased sense of urgency that the pandemic has brought, that we really need to leverage this. And now it's accelerating even more with the workforce shortage and all the other challenges that we're facing in healthcare. But also it means that the role of government is changing everywhere. And I announced this in the OpenGA as well, but during the OpenGA, our national parliament passed a law that gives the national government the mandate to set to make health data exchange standardized, mandatory. For us, that's a big step, because we weren't able and allowed to do that for over 10 years. So now everyone is sort of more aligned, and the political will, the capital, they're already there now. So the role of the government is changing as well, to protect and to safeguard our common values, our common standards, if you will. And it's, like I said, I started with, the Netherlands is only a small country, and we're right at the flows of people and goods and in Europe. So we now also see that the same kind of development is happening in Europe. And I'm not sure if everyone's aware, but ever since the new European Commission came, they have a very strong agenda focused on not having another Brexit. So Brexit really shook up Europe. And the thing is that it became very political, and healthcare is an excellent carrier to, if you're able to influence people's health in a positive way, that's a really good way into your voters' confidence. So if Europe can make themselves useful for people's health, then the anti-European sentiments will go down. That's one of the reasons why Europe is really focusing on healthcare right now. And what they've done is two things. One is they created the Digital Decade 2030 strategy, which is, in my personal view, is amazing. Just the idea of creating a European data Schengen area, if you will, with, well, the count is now, I think, at 12 new regulations that are being proposed on AI, data governance, data ownership, digital markets, cybersecurity, interoperability, at the same level as the GDPR is doing. So this will raise the bar globally. And the first sector they're applying all these horizontal new principles and laws in is healthcare. So the first proposal that they have is the European health data space. It's still a proposal. There's a lot of negotiations that still needs to go on. But if you haven't already, please check out what the European health data space is intended to be, and where the discussions are going in, because this is about exchanging data internationally across borders for better care, but it's also very much about the secondary use for research, for innovation, for better policy making. And semantic interoperability is one of the key cornerstones there in order to make this happen. That's one of the reasons why the European Commission is funding the member states' membership fees in part for SNOMED. So the IPS, coming back to the IPS, it's what Niels wanted. Is he wants his data to be able to move around within a country, but also wherever he goes. It should be universal. And I think the IPS shows that we can do this together and that it's actually possible. And that's why I think the G7 work is really good, because it shows that it requires leadership and that it's at that level, it's even possible to bring topics like this, because like we said, it is a fundamental issue. And that we now have this platform with the GDHP where we can actually continue this work and accept this kind of challenge that has been given by the G7 to keep doing this and keep advancing it and keep growing this into other use cases and with other standards. So the GDHP is an informal group of national health authorities, which I think is the key factor, is that it's informal. The other thing that I think is really important is that it is, as an informal group, becoming more and more a global authority. And the next step for the GDHP is to start dancing with the whole global ecosystem. And as a small country, we cannot do all this alone. And Europe is big already, but it's only Europe. So I think the reason why the Netherlands is and why I'm standing here is that we have to think big, but we have to act small and then take that to the next platforms time and time again. That was what I wanted to share with you. And I hope Niels is proud of us. And I think this work really makes him proud. Thank you very much.
Thank you to everybody. I do have a few questions to kick it off with, and I'm not sure, but we'll try to get some audience questions if we have time. So Karen, perhaps let's start with you. Ultimately, clinical information flows are optimized for the benefit of the patient. How has this movement for improving health interoperability taken the patient into consideration, and what are the opportunities and challenges?
I think our starting point has always been with the patient. This is about patients' rights to information. For a long time, I worked in digital primary care, I still do, but particularly around patient online services. And one of the things that became very obvious and we could evidence was that if patients are involved in their care and with their information, they are generally healthier. They conform to their medication regimes. They understand what they need to do and why they need to do it. So being in an environment with that as the starting and foundation, sort of the key principle for us has been essential. I also think that in the past, and it's increasingly less so, that patients are an underutilized resource within healthcare. I, as a patient, know what's wrong with me, how I feel, how I might need treatment, what I want to achieve from that treatment, and it's not always the same. Patients have to be part of the whole conversation, and making their information available to them is essential.
Thank you. Shifting gears, Alastair, we'll give you this one. How has the clinical community reacted to the proposed use of the International Patient Summary?
It has, and we did post our specification quite widely to attract as much comment as we possibly could. And at one end of the spectrum, we had somebody who commented, and this person is reasonably well respected in the community, who said, I read the specification, with a growing sense of outrage. And by the time you've read my comments, you'll probably be as angry as I am. And that thread was eventually had to be moderated out. But I think what that person was saying was that they wanted, ideal information, whereas the IPS is maybe talking about the best information we have. So I took it in that vein. But, crucially, we had the support of the New Zealand, Royal New Zealand College of General Practitioners, who said, we support the development of this standard because we should be collecting this information in order to share it with other points of care, and we will work with you to embed the right standards.
Okay, to wrap things up and come back to the topic of the broader GDHP organization, how is this collective supporting the achievement of your digital health goals? And why are so many countries involved globally in Herko?
I think one of the main things with the GDHP is that they are all national health authorities, so we all know, instinctively know our challenges, and they are all the same. And I mean, the discussion here shows that already, is that we're all facing the same work, doing the same work, and looking for the same kinds of answers. Also, the GDHP is really just a group of people coming together, and that's how it started as well, with I think UK, America, and Australia, meeting each other at these conferences all the time, discussing the same things over and over, and say, well, why don't we do this together? And that's how it grew and grew. And I think we're now at a little over 30 countries. And it's very open, and everyone is allowed to join. But it does require you to participate in the work streams that we have. And the work that's done on the IPS, I think, is a really good example, because it does show that you have to have at least a mature level of maturity of thinking about the issues, and then the group will help you to develop the capabilities that you need in your country or in your health system. Or in our case, there were these personal health record service providers, which are private companies and organizations that tested within these mini connectathons to get patient data out of our national or our healthcare systems and send them to New Zealand and to Australia and to the US and to the UK and other countries. So it's very practical, it's informal, which means that there is a lot of room for discussions that we normally wouldn't put on the agenda. Maybe they're too sensitive, or maybe they're too obvious, but so I think that character, that informal character, is really good. And the last point there is that they're all authorities. So if we do come to a point where we agree this is something that we should do, I mean, with countries like India, Indonesia, the United States, Saudi Arabia, Australia, New Zealand, you actually can create critical mass on these issues globally. So yeah, it's a really low threshold to global influence.
Very good. I think we have time maybe for one question. Charles. Kelly's got a microphone for you.
It's more a comment than a question, really. But I'm one of the 30 million, so I'm an English citizen. I use the NHS app. And what I would say is that the NHS app makes a difference because it gives utility. So I can order my medications online. And I would put it to you that the IPS could make the next leap by making utility. It's not enough just to have data. You've got to be able to do something with it.
I think one of the things that we thought about is, I suppose it's a stage thing, is what could be the core. And as we were working through all the different use cases and we were talking to colleagues, and one of the ways that we did it was have an idea and test it out and test it and test it. When the next idea came in, we tested everything going back. Will that still work? Is this going to be a problem? And that's literally what we could do within the limited time we've got. But it became very evident that there were a lot of external use cases around that, and different programs within NHS England would be looking at, well, that would be really good for us, or it could be really good and we could add this in. So for example, traveling. As a traveller, what do I need? I need my passport. I need a ticket to get out there. I should need some health insurance. You know, blah, blah, blah. So what can I have with me that makes it easy for me to consume and use that information? So why not? Why not have your vaccination status in an IPS record that you can show and demonstrate? Why not have your insurance documents in an app alongside your IPS record? So what we're saying is we're setting up the structure, how that then can be used in different technologies is up to whomever. And that is a global market because this is a global solution. So I think there are lots of opportunities that we could take. And we're not even, you know, saying that it would be in competition to something like the NHS app. It could all be one and the same thing for patients within England. So yeah, it's got a long way to go, and there are a lot of opportunities that could be developed around it.
Well, I think we've reached the end of the hour. So thank you to all of our panelists for participating, and thanks everyone for coming here. Have a great expo, and we'll conclude with that.